I used to keep our life inside a shared grocery list. It sounds silly, but that app was our alphabet. If milk, lemons, couscous showed up at 3:12 p.m., I knew she'd swung by the market on her way home and was probably in the mood to cook. If basil appeared with 3 question marks, I knew she'd gotten inspired by a recipe, and I'd better not forget it. When we fought about stupid things, we still added coffee filters and toothpaste to the list. When she was away at a conference, she'd drop in dark chocolate. For you, stop pretending you don't like it. And I'd add pistachios like a handshake. It was ordinary and small and completely us. The first thing that went missing wasn't milk. It was that list. Elena turned off the share without mentioning it. I noticed because I went to add foil one Saturday, and the app returned me to a page that looked like a hotel room after checkout, blank bed, folded towels, no trace we'd slept there. I texted, "Hey, did the list bug out?" She wrote back, "I'm trying something new, pen and paper, less screen time." I sent a thumbs up and stared at the phone like it might tell me why my chest felt heavier. My name is Amir. I'm 39. I manage back-end systems for a hospital network fluent in databases and downtime windows and the quiet satisfaction of green dashboards. Elena is 37, a brand strategist who can take a mess of sentences and return a line that makes a company sound like a person. We met 9 summers ago at a birthday party neither of us wanted to attend. She was leaving just as I arrived. Our mutual friend pushed us together and said, "Two introverts. This is either going to be perfect or painful." It was perfect in small, durable ways. We were the kind of couple who answered, "How are you?" with "Fine, actually," and meant it. We got married under string lights behind a restaurant. 24 people, a cake my aunt iced unevenly and Elena loved because it tasted like childhood. We rented a small apartment with big windows and a front door that stuck when it rained. We cared about the same unglamorous things: sleep, good coffee, showing up for people. We adopted a rescue cat, Fig, whose entire personality is a whistle he makes before leaping into your lap. We collected a life out of days. I don't know how long she'd been slipping away by the time the list disappeared. I know how it started looking. She began taking her phone with her everywhere. Bathroom, laundry room, balcony, as if the walls had learned to read. She used to toss it on the kitchen counter and forget it under dish towels by accident. Now it lived face down with Do Not Disturb on, like she owed it privacy. She told me she was running more. Early, before sunrise. I bought her reflective bands and didn't say I was worried. I didn't want to sound like a parent. Her perfume changed. Less vanilla, more green. She said the old one made her feel like a cupcake. She started a new work routine where she'd go to a cafe 2 nights a week to get ahead. I told myself this was ambition, not absence. The story held until it didn't. 3 weeks after the list, our insurance emailed an explanation of benefits with a polite subject line that could have been a joke if my life were a sitcom. "Good news, this claim is covered." The provider was Linden Counseling, an out-of-network office across town. The date was a Tuesday night. Elena had been at the cafe, headphones on, deep work. I forwarded it to her with, "Glad you're taking care of yourself. Could we go together sometime? Might help us too." She replied right away, "It's just for me. Boundaries." I typed, "Of course," and deleted it, and then typed it again. She rarely used the word boundaries with me. I sat at the kitchen table and touched the edge of the email like it had a pulse. We had done counseling before. 3 years into our marriage, after her mother died and the grief turned our calendar into a series of obligations that felt like a test, we'd gone to a woman named Patricia who had a lamp that made the room glow like a cave. She gave us chairs that were too soft and asked us hard questions anyway. We got through that season with our hands still finding each other under tables. When I suggested we go back, Elena said she wanted her own space first. "I don't want to perform being okay for you in there," she said. I thought about the list and the way everything found its place in it. I nodded. "Okay," I said. "Tell me what you want me to do in the meantime." She said, "Please stop asking me what you can do." I said nothing and understood nothing and put the kettle on anyway. People always ask about the first concrete proof. We think we want an object we can hold up to our fear and make it sit down. A receipt, a photo, a lipstick on a shirt. One of those cliches other people's disasters leave behind. My first proof was a sound. It was a voice memo I wasn't meant to hear. Elena used our kitchen speaker for everything: recipes, news briefings. Play that playlist with the stomp claps, timers for bread. The device had started doing that thing where if you say something that accidentally rhymes with a command, it thinks you've asked it to perform. I was dicing carrots when it chirped, resuming last recording from Elena. I opened my mouth to say stop, but her voice arrived first, soft and private, the tone you use when you're leaning into someone who is letting you be small. "I can't tonight," she said. "I told him I'm at the cafe." A man's voice responded, low, intimate in a way that was not yet sexual, but had already left the station. "He always believes you," he said, not mocking, almost admiring. She laughed, tired. "He trusts me," she said. "That's what makes this awful." He murmured something I couldn't quite catch. Then her voice again, whispering in that way you whisper when the whisper itself is foreplay. "Tomorrow then, after the session, the blue door." The speaker chimed, message saved. I stood with orange half-moons stuck to my fingers, and a sensation I can only describe as a floor deciding to become water. I said stop, and the house obeyed. I wiped my hands and turned the device off and on like maybe I'd caught a ghost. Elena came home an hour later, smelling like the cafe and whatever the new perfume was pretending not to be. I watched her put her bag down and kick off her shoes and say, "It's freezing." And I said, "We could buy a real heater." And we did not talk about what a blue door is. I didn't tell anyone. Not my brother, not my friend Sam, who offers to show up with a bat when I tell him someone was rude to me on the train. Not the internet, where people flatten stories the way you flatten a shirt that doesn't fit anymore. I told myself to wait until I had a sentence I couldn't misunderstand. The sentence arrived the following Thursday, written in someone else's handwriting on a Post-it, stuck to the bottom of Elena's water bottle. Blue door, 6:30, R. I Googled Linden Counseling again and zoomed in on Street View. There it was, an old house converted into offices, white siding, brick steps, a bright blue door that looked like it wanted attention. When she told me on Tuesday that couples counseling might not be a bad idea, I didn't breathe for a second. "I found someone," she said. "Rowan. A friend recommended him. He's supposed to be good with repair." The word sat between us like a broken bowl. I said, "Okay," because I imagined myself a decent person who knows when to step into a room, even if it contains the thing I'm afraid to look at. Rowan looked exactly like someone's favorite professor. Mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, sweaters that wanted to be cardigans but weren't trying too hard. His office had the soft light all therapists cultivate and a framed print of a coastline that made you want to tell the truth. He shook my hand in that way that says, "We're equal here." He asked how we wanted to start. Elena glanced at me and then at the floor. "We've been off," she said. "I don't want to break us. He keeps trying to help. I feel like I can't be seen." Rowan nodded like we were telling him something he'd heard before, but still felt. "What feels unseen?" he asked. She said, "Me. The version of me that isn't efficient." The first sessions were good in the way that a clean cut will sometimes bleed less than a scrape. We were precise. I learned to say "I feel" without attaching an argument to it. She learned to sit with me when I didn't know how to fix a bad day. Rowan asked questions that turned our living room into a map. He leaned forward when he talked to Elena and leaned back when he talked to me. I noticed and told myself to stop noticing. I wanted this to work more than I wanted to be right. Once, as we were leaving, a woman sitting in the waiting room looked up from her magazine and smiled at Elena with a recognition that felt too familiar. Elena smiled back with the guiltless ease of someone returning a library book. I told myself lots of people come here. Boundaries. Blue doors are public things. The second month, Rowan started giving us homework. Touch without planning sex. 1 date a week with no logistics and no talk about work. No phones in the bedroom. He emphasized repair like it was a muscle. Use it or lose it. Elena seemed lighter after sessions, in a way that made me both hopeful and irrelevant. She texted less during dinner and looked at me more. She held my hand when we walked to the train. She started kissing me like we were kissing again, not clocking in. We had a Saturday that felt like the old times, cooking together, dancing to something dumb in the kitchen because the song told us to. That night I thought maybe the voice memo was a trick of wires. Maybe R was a receptionist reminding her of the door. Maybe I had been building a case where there was just the mess of two people trying on new ways to be. The twist started as a clerical error. The hospital system where I work contracts with third parties for some billing back-ends, and sometimes statements make their way through different channels. An EOB arrived a few weeks into therapy with an earlier date of service from Linden Counseling than our first session with Rowan. It showed 6 individual sessions billed to Elena over the course of 2 months. Tuesdays mostly, 5:30, 6:20 p.m. The provider listed was Rowan H. We had our first couples session on a Thursday. My stomach fell through floors I didn't know I had. I decided to ask in the room. It felt cowardly to wait until we were home. It also felt, in the dumb logic of marital rituals, appropriate to bring the question to the place where the answers were supposed to live now. Near the end of our next session, while Rowan was doing his gentle summary, I'm hearing that Elena feels, and Amir wants to know. I said, when did we start? He looked at me puzzled. 3 weeks ago. I said, Elena's individual sessions with you started 2 months before that. He did not change expression. Elena did. The change was quiet and total, like a power outage that understands drama is tacky. She folded one hand over the other. Rowan said, we can talk about why that matters. I said, it matters because I thought we picked you together. Elena's voice arrived like careful glass. I knew him already, she said. I didn't want to tell you because I thought you'd distrust it, and I needed you to trust something. Trust is a bridge you cross, and then, if it holds, you forget there's water beneath it. I felt the water. Did you and he? I started and stopped, not wanting to make myself a cliché. Rowan spoke like an adult cutting off a child's tantrum. I do not have inappropriate relationships with clients. The grammar almost saved me. Almost. I would love to say I left, that I refused to participate. I stayed. We stayed for 6 more sessions. When Elena cried in that room, Rowan's face went soft in a way that made everything else in the world stop asking for attention. He would pass her a tissue with both hands, eyes on hers. When I cried, he predicted it and paused like he'd carved out the silence in which I could feel dignified. He had a talent for intimacy that made me jealous of anyone who'd had him for a father or a teacher. He also had a planter by his window with something trailing that Elena once touched absent-mindedly while talking, her fingers moving along the vine like it was an old habit. I stared at that touch and felt like the guy in the movie the audience wants to warn. I tried not to become a detective. I failed in increments. I checked our door camera history and found a handful of clips of Elena coming home at 7:52 p.m. On nights she told me she'd been at the cafe until 9. She could have been anywhere in that hour. I checked our household's screen time list and saw her phone had added a passcode the day after the EOB trail began. I checked the cafe's Instagram and saw a photo from a Tuesday evening fundraiser we would have gone to, and in the background Elena's black coat and a hand on her elbow that was not mine. If you've ever watched yourself collect a set of proofs that refuse to add up to a story you can survive, you know that confirmation is not relief. It was my friend Sam who said the words I had been dodging. We were at a bar on a Wednesday, 2 men pretending work required beer. He listened without interrupting the way he had when my father died, as if he'd learned how to be furniture that could hold me. He said, if you file a complaint, you are going to war? Is that what you want? War. I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd thought of it as naming a thing so it would lose its power. Sam said, there's another way to think about betrayal, not just bodies. Who did she make the narrator? I asked him what that meant. He said, who gets to tell your story back to you in a way that makes you doubt yourself? It was the precise cut I needed. The last straw was tiny and humiliating. A hair tie. It rolled out from under our bed when I swept. It wasn't Elena's kind. She uses the flat ones with the metal clasp. This was one of those thick elastic bands with a little knot. It smelled like the new perfume, yes, but also like something alive and different. It's absurd, the objects we end up holding like we've been given a riddle. I sat there on the floor with a cat toy and lint and a dumb piece of elastic and realized I couldn't keep living as a man who treated his home like a crime scene. I confronted Elena at breakfast when the world was most likely to be kind to us. Fig hopped on the chair like an assistant. I slid the EOB printout across the table as gently as you move a sleeping child. I said, "How long did you see him before we started?" She looked at the paper and then at me and did not reach for either. 8 weeks, and she said, "We met at a professional talk. He made sense. He told me I could choose the self I wanted to practice." My mouth tasted like pennies. "And the other man," I said, "the blue door, the messages." Her face changed then, not into shame, into an absence of performance. Finally honest. "Yes," she said, "there is someone." She breathed in like it hurt. "It started after, not before." I don't know why that matters, but it does in my head. I felt something get very still behind my ribs. "After you knew him," I said. "After you knew us there." "Don't make that the story," she said quietly, desperate enough to be ugly. "It wasn't like that." Washernam, I heard the truth living in the spaces between the words and hated myself for still trying to reduce the harm by controlling the chapter headers. I asked, "Do you love him?" She shook her head too fast. "No," she said, and then, different. "I love the way he made me feel looked at." I said, "And you don't love me?" She said, "I love the you who never asked for proof." We both sat and listened to the ugliest sentence either of us had put in the room. The conclusion I came to surprised me. I did not want to punish. I wanted to stop negotiating the version of reality I was allowed to stand on. I told Rowan I couldn't keep coming. Elena wanted to try someone else. I said I wouldn't be able to stop weighing every pronoun and glance, and that this was no longer repair, it was theater. I emailed Rowan and copied Elena and said something bland and correct about discontinuing services. He replied with 2 lines that read like a professor's recommendation letter. I drafted a complaint to the state board and left it in my drafts for a week. On a Friday afternoon, after a day of solving a cascade of database errors that had begun with a typo in a cron job, I hit send. It wasn't war. It was a record. If nothing came of it, it would still be a sentence I got to tell in my voice. We separated like people who still remember how the other takes their tea. Elena moved out first short-term sublet near the agency. She took half the plates and left the measuring cups. She took the big mirror from the hallway and left the small frame photograph of us from New Year's Eve 3 years ago, faces pressed together in the terrible hat I loved. "Do you want this?" she asked. I didn't answer because the answer would require a list of nested answers. We told our families the polite version. My mother texted me a prayer heart and a reminder to sleep. Her father called me unexpectedly and said, "You were a good man in my daughter's house," and I needed to sit down on the floor for that one. People like tidy ends. There aren't any here. There's what happened next, which is I learned how to be a person alone with a stove and a list that belongs to just me. I stopped checking her socials after I realized each photo produced one of 3 panes, and none of them improved with repetition. I ran in the mornings with a terrible playlist I will never show anyone. I found a plant that thrives on neglect and decided to give it more than that. I cried in the cereal aisle and pretended I was considering fiber content. I had nights when I wanted to text her just to say, "Do you remember when we lost power and ate ice cream by the window?" And I didn't, and I also didn't turn that restraint into a medal. The board wrote back 6 weeks later. They said they'd received other complaints about Rowan's boundaries, that my documentation helped, that the matter was under review. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt like I'd finally placed my piece of the story where it belonged. Not in me. Elena texted me once, months into the new arrangement. "I'm sorry I made our love a mirror for my need to be seen. It was real and careful and late." I replied, "I wanted to be the man who didn't ask for proof." And then I put my phone face down and went outside where the evening was making the street look like forgiveness. Here's the part I promised would be more interesting and more honest than a neat plot twist. I had to forgive the version of me who believed her because he loved her, and the version of me who suspected because he loved himself. The twist wasn't that the other man was someone I knew. He wasn't. Or that the therapist was a supervillain. He was a human who failed expensively. The twist was internal. I stopped auditioning for the role of husband who can win his marriage back if he shows enough grace. Con, I started practicing being a man who trusts his own eyes in full light. People ask what I would say to Elna now if we sat again on that back step with the string lights and the bad cake and the good jokes. I would tell her I wish we had taken ourselves off the stage sooner. I would tell her I loved how she arranges a table and makes strangers feel like they've always had a seat. I would tell her I wish I'd said I'm lonely instead of, are you okay? I would tell her that some betrayals happen in bodies and some happen in narration, and I forgive her for both without inviting either back into my house. This morning I opened my list app, the private one now, and added lemons, couscous, basil. It felt like defiance and also like nothing at all, the way healing often does. I put on my shoes and went to the market where the guy who always adds an extra sprig of mint to my bag does it again without making it a big moment. I walked home past the blue door that is not mine and didn't slow down. Fig met me at the threshold with his whistle meow, offended that I own hands and haven't used them to open a can. I cooked dinner and ate standing up, then laughed because I could hear Elena telling me to use a plate. I used a plate. When I turned off the kitchen speaker, it chirped cheerfully, resuming last recording, and nothing played. I waited on purpose for a full breath. I said, stop, and meant it. Then I turned on some dumb song with stomp claps, and in my small, cleared kitchen, I clapped along badly and offbeat, and no one watched me but me, and that somehow finally felt like being seen. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. It means a lot. New stories like this one are posted every single day, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one. And if this story touched you, please give it a like. It really helps more people find our content.